Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute. Josh Hasten here, correspondent for JNS News. I am in studio with Alex Traiman, the CEO of JNS. We are in Jerusalem, the heart of the Jewish people, the eternal capital of the state of Israel. Alex, how are you?
Doing well, thank you. How are you doing, Josh?
I'm doing okay. War continues to wage down in the south. IDF continues to pursue victory in Gaza. At the same time, one of the top stories this week is the United States continues to propose alternative plans for the IDF's upcoming operation in Rafah and Rafah. The Americans have presented their alternative to a full-scale conquest of Gaza, and there are three items here, according to what the U.S. plan says. Number one, the plan includes technological advances to secure the Gaza-Egypt border, prevent smuggling, arms smuggling. Number two, it includes the isolation and encirclement of Rafah by Israeli forces with targeted raids. Instead of a full-scale operation, they want targeted raids. And number three, the plan involves the establishment of a joint U.S.-Israeli command center to coordinate activities in Gaza. Senior U.S. officials stressing, of course, as they have been all along, the humanitarian situation for those in Rafah. What is your initial reaction to that three-pronged approach by the U.S. as opposed to what Israel says it's going to do, and that is a full-scale invasion of Rafah?
Well, last night in a press conference, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that he has approved plans for a full-scale invasion of Rafah, which is the further southernmost Gazan city. And what that plan will entail is also moving the civilian population that's basically living there in tent cities to areas north of Gaza before they go in. But basically, this U.S. alternative is a plan to just not go into Rafah. That's clear. The United States doesn't want Israel to go in. They said, okay, if you need to carry out targeted raids because you have specific intelligence, you can go ahead. But they also are saying we want to set up a joint command center so that this way, if you have targeted intelligence, that you have to first clear with the United States even before you do a targeted raid. So a very different concept to how to deal with Rafah than what Israel wants to do. Israel's saying that there are Hamas battalions that are operating inside Rafah now, and they need to be cleaned out. I think Israel's made it very clear to the United States and will continue to make clear that this alternative is not an alternative at all, and that they do plan on going ahead. But I think that it's here obvious that the United States is just simply trying to prevent it from happening and trying to slow this war down.
It seems like they have, week after week, all these creative ideas, whether it's a temporary port off the coast of Gaza to provide humanitarian aid, whether it's these three alternatives to going into Rafah.
These are not creative alternatives, okay? I think that has to be made clear. Basically, what they're saying is don't go in, have better technology surveillance, which Israel's going to do anyway along the Gaza-Egypt border. That's not like a new idea. You have to prevent smuggling from coming in, and they're basically saying only go in on a targeted basis, as the same way that Israel would do, let's say, in a city like Jenin, in Samaria, where they only enter into those areas when there's specific intelligence. There's no like novel ideas in this plan.
So let me ask you this, explain this. Well, first of all, when I say creative, I mean not good, not necessarily good, not positive, and especially from where Israel's coming from. I'm definitely not in favor of any of these plans whatsoever.
I think Israel would
do what it has to do.
But Israel would be open to creative plans, right? So, for example, the United States came early in the war and said, create safe zones for civilians to move, and Israel took that advice and did. Allowed civilians to move through the humanitarian corridors to safe zones. Rafah was one of those safe zones. Of course, the danger of that creative plan was that now you have all of the remaining terrorists, including hostages, holed up in that safe zone that was part of this creative plan that was created in the beginning. And now you have to adapt and come up with a new creative plan. But here, there's not really creativity.
So let me ask you this then. At the same time, the U.S. has approved an arms package. Apparently, this was something in the works for years, but it happened. The Biden administration authorized billions of dollars in bombs, fighter jets to Israel, all this military equipment, and I'm not an expert when it comes to all these different types of bombs. We could list them off here, but I'm not going to do that right now. It says that it's worth roughly $2.5 billion.
Heavy bombs, 2,000-pound bombs, 500-pound bombs, bombers, F-35 fighter jets.
So, but on one hand, they're saying, don't go into Rafah. Let's carry out pinpointed strikes. Let's do all these other things. And here they are still. The United States is providing Israel with the military capabilities that it actually needs to carry out a Rafah operation. So what are they trying to say here by doing both of these things at the same time?
Well, first of all, as you noted, that these weapons packages were approved before this.
Correct.
Okay, so something that the Congress already had, the Pentagon, State Department already committed to providing Israel. Israel is dependent on American weaponry. The leverage that America has over Israeli policy is on the basis of America delivering Israel this type of weaponry. The United States has been putting a lot of pressure on Israel, politically, diplomatically, militarily. If the United States would not continue to deliver the weapons that it had already approved and had promised to do, you could rest assured that Israel would cease taking the advice of the Americans. It's because America delivers this weaponry to the United States, to Israel, that Israel takes the advice with a strong degree of seriousness. And I think the United States also knows that. And if they would stop doing that, it would cause a tremendous rupture in the relationship. So this is a way that the United States can say to Israel, we still have your back. We are still partners. We are still allies, and we maintain our commitments to you. These are commitments, right? It's not good graces. These are commitments that are part of a package that's already been approved. And I think the United States is just saying, look, we're still going to make good on our commitments.
I want to switch gears here and look internally here in the state of Israel. I mean, it's been, a different world since October the 7th. You had the realities of October the 6th. And I'm talking about all the demonstrations, anti-government demonstrations that took place before the 7th of October. And now what you have is a relatively, I would say, a new phenomenon. Kind of maybe even going back in some cases. You could argue that we're going back to October the 6th. In other words, lines are being blurred. And this past Saturday night, you had families of hostages. And again, I would never judge the actions of those who have loved ones being held, direct family members in Gaza, but you had families of hostages joining with anti-government protesters. Then there was a big blur there. You saw it on the streets of Tel Aviv. You saw it in Jerusalem just the other night as well. But they're saying that for the first time since the beginning of the war, those lines are really, really blurred. You have hostages who are aligning themselves with the anti-government movement. At the same time, you have groups like the Tikva Forum for Families of Hostages saying, no, we will not participate in anti-government protesters. Lines are being blurred. Lines are being drawn in the sand. And for me, personally, I'd say it's very scary because we are in a terrible place as a society, as a country. Before October the 7th, I'm talking about internally. And I don't want to go back to those internal disputes. We all have to be on the same page, carry out this mission of destroying the evil, which is Hamas, and then, of course, focusing on the north. But I don't like this disunity. And unfortunately, it looks like this past Saturday night, we got a taste of what could be more and more protests against the government, even by hostages, the families of hostages.
There's a lot of pieces to unravel here. I think that from the beginning, we already saw the notion that the anti-Netanyahu movement, which is the same movement that was against Netanyahu during these 5 election cycles that we've had in the last 5 years, the same people behind the movement against the judicial reforms, which is what caused this protest movement, said tremendous signals of disunity through the nation, calls for civil war, calls that Netanyahu was going to lose the defense and intelligence establishments, that they wouldn't report to the reservists and Air Force pilots wouldn't report to duty if they were called up. This sent the signals of disunity and vulnerability to Israel's enemies, and I think that most Israelis felt that we were going in a bad way, as you mentioned, before October 6th, and yet there was this unification that took place on October 7th. But from that very first moment, the very organizers of the anti-Netanyahu demonstrations for the last 5 years, the very organizers of the anti-judicial reform protests, who were exactly the same people, they immediately got on board with the hostage movement. It was a strategic decision that they took from day one, is to immediately support the families of hostages. The Brothers in Arms organization, which is with the main organizers of the judicial reform protests, started switching their activities, giving aid to hostage families, giving aid to families that had been expelled from their homes as a result of what happened on October 7th. And it was only a matter of time before they restarted their agenda to try to push another election. And part of this also connects to what's been going on with the U.S.-Israel relationship, that they have been communicating to the United States that they think what needs to happen is a new election. And this is what they were doing also before October 6th, is going to the outside world and trying to put pressure for what they want domestically, to get that pressure being pushed from the outside. And you're seeing in the last few weeks how this strategy is now coming to a head. And once again, we have tens of thousands of people in the streets, this mix-up, mashing of the hostage families, who by and large, by the way, the communities that were hit the hardest on October 7th happen to be from left-wing communities, kibbutzim, that never vote for Netanyahu. Their voting practices are to vote against Netanyahu. They were against Netanyahu before October 7th. So it really wasn't a big stretch to see these families that want Netanyahu out, having nothing to do with October 7th, doubling down, and especially wanting him out after October 7th. So we're starting to see this very dangerous situation start up again. And what's particularly distressing about it is that we're not done fighting the war against Hamas. But more importantly, if we think that October 7th was a dangerous moment for Israel, we have another looming war with Hezbollah. And so to have, again, this disunity, this vulnerability is a sign of immense weakness that really Israelis should be better than expressing right now.
Unfortunately, the chants the other night at the rally in Jerusalem, elections now, elections now. This was a rally either supported or organized by opposition leader Yair Lapid. He said it is called elections, elections now. Prime Minister Netanyahu went on TV last night, and he argued that elections now would paralyze the country in the midst of war. It would paralyze negotiations for freeing our hostages, or bring an end to the war before the goals are completely achieved. That's what he says, elections. And he obviously is right. I mean, how can you, in the middle of all this, as we're fighting a war, take so many resources and money and just all your investment, which is dedicated towards defeating Hamas, and go to elections now?
You have an opposition in this country that has been trying for the last 5 years to unseat Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay, we had 5 elections in 5 years. You don't see that in any other democracy around the world, so many elections. You can argue, as we've discussed on this program, that Netanyahu won all 5 of those elections, one after the other, after the other, after the other. We are barely a year and a half after the last election, not even. And the idea that this country should go to an election right now is not what the country wants, but it certainly is what the opposition wants. And they know that they can bring tens of thousands of people to the streets. They know that they can create the scenes that feed the media. They know that the media wants to see another election as well. And it's really the ugliest part of Israeli society coming to the surface at the most inopportune time. But at the rate things are going right now, I would expect that this protest movement is only going to continue, and it's only going to gain momentum. And we really have to see how it's going to play out together while Israel is fighting a military war and also a diplomatic war. But this doesn't really help any of the country's war aims.
So turning our attention back to that military war, the IDF wrapped up a counter-terror operation in the Shifa hospital. We talked about last week how the terrorists came back to Shifa. And a lot of videos released by the IDF showing how Hamas was using the maternity ward at Shifa for arms storage, for carrying out terrorist attacks, finding so many different things embedded within the hospital. And, of course, a lot of that's ignored by the Israel haters out there who stand up for Hamas, unfortunately. Dozens of mortar shells, explosive devices, sniper rifles, Kalashnikov rifles, pistols, magazines, mortars, ammunition, all of that seized. More than 500 Hamas and Islamic Jihad members arrested, at least 200 terrorists killed. And also the IDF spokesperson's office said that some of those terrorists who were found at Shifa Hospital, they were freed from jail in the Gilad Shalit deal, in which Israel traded thousands of, I think, 1,027 terrorists for Gilad Shalit. Those individuals, well, many of them returned to terrorism, and a lot of them were those who Israel had to go back and either rearrest or take out at that Shifa hospital. Looks like that operation for now is done. Who knows? Maybe they'll go back to Shifa a third time. I don't know. But this is what happens when you release terrorists. You get more terrorism. We saw it for ourselves.
Yeah, a few things over here. Number one is you see what the IDF is doing in the lead up to a potential operation in Rafah, which is still probably weeks away. Because Israel will have to move residents, citizens north out of Rafah. So there's a lot of work that needs to get done. The IDF is not sitting twiddling its thumbs waiting for what to do. They are going back through other areas of the Gaza Strip, some areas that they had been inside, like Shifa Hospital and others, and clearing out these areas once again and really securing their control over the other areas of the Gaza Strip so that when you do go into Rafah, that you don't have to now worry that these other places are going to become terror strongholds once again. So IDF's using this time very wisely, as you could see, going into Shifa Hospital. And yes, Hamas does use Shifa Hospital and all the hospitals in the Gaza Strip as command and control centers. These are their military bases. They intentionally set their bases up in hospitals because this is what sets up Israel for the diplomatic war, the narrative war, that Israel attacks hospitals. Yes, Israel attacks hospitals when they're used as military bases. And yes, the question about releasing terrorists from prison, and this is the whole strategy that Hamas wanted from day one. Take hostages in order to get prisoners out of Israeli jails. These prisoners are terrorists. Okay, Yahya Sinwar was a terrorist that was released from prison in the Gilad Shalit deal. And so now when we talk about releasing prisoners in exchange for hostages, what you're talking about is releasing known murderers or attempted murderers back into the society. And then the question is, how much blood are you going to have on your hands for releasing these prisoners? This is the moral quandary. Yes, of course, you want to get the hostages back, the hostages that are already taken. Okay, so yes, let's say you get back 30, 40, 50, 60, however many hostages might be left still alive. How many people will be killed as a result of letting these known murderers out of jail? Can you kill somebody else down the line in order to get somebody else home today? This is the moral question that the IDF and the Netanyahu and the leadership have to grapple with.
So we're talking about the potential release of hostages in Israeli jails, but at the same time, unfortunately, here on the home front, there are many terrorists roaming throughout Israel. And yesterday we saw two serious terrorist attacks. One yesterday evening in Gan Yavneh, which is near Ashdod, 3 Israelis seriously wounded in a knifing attack by an Arab terrorist from Hebron. They say potentially he was working there at a mall in the town of Gan Yavneh. He had 2 knives on him. I saw all the footage, unfortunately, late last night, stabbing 3 Israelis. 2 are in serious condition. One is still fighting for his life, one of the Israelis who was wounded, a male, and one moderate. And let's just stress, moderate. You can say moderate, and it
doesn't sound that bad.
It doesn't sound that bad.
Moderately wounded means
you can
be maimed for life, losing a limb.
It affects your life forever. So this was a serious attack. And then yesterday, also earlier in the day, an IDF soldier was wounded in the town of Beer Sheba, that's in southern Israel. The terrorists, they actually have the footage. I don't know if you saw this. They have the footage of the terrorist leaving his home in Rahat, in the community of the city of Rahat, the Bedouin town. And they have footage of him leaving his home, getting on a bus, getting off a bus, and then attacking a soldier at a bus station in Beer Sheba as the soldier, got off the bus. Thank God in this case, the soldier was only lightly wounded. In both cases, the terrorists were killed by security personnel who were in the area. But it seems, another Ramadan another holiday which is supposed to be a holiday of reflection and peace and tranquility and all of that, yet we're seeing an upswing in terrorist attacks here on the home front.
Yeah, if you talk about Ramadan, we're seeing headlines in other publications about the Friday prayers on the Temple Mount. The headlines are, "Another Friday Ramadan prayer session ends without violence."
Yeah, I don't get
right?
that.
You know, it's
because
the expectation is that it absolutely could be violent, because these are people that are prone and have shown a pattern of going to violence during Ramadan. Ramadan has become a holy month for killing Jews in the land of Israel. Unfortunately, you know, there was also the shooting in the Jordan Valley last week.
Yes.
And that shooting was perpetrated by a member of the Palestinian Security Forces. And that's the second such attack in the past month. It's been carried out by members of the Palestinian Security Forces who are American trained and have been provided with guns and weapons. So there's been a major uptick in deadly violence since October 7th. We already had an uptick before October 7th, but this has only gotten worse and worse. And there's no really telling what it's going to take to put the lid back on this intifada-style violence, which is now becoming a very regular, all too regular occurrence throughout Judea and Samaria, throughout other parts of Israel as well.
Well, unfortunately, the focus, is not on this violence, at least by the so-called mainstream media. They talk about settler violence. That's a lot more attractive in terms of a headline. When Jews, graffiti a wall somewhere in Judea and Samaria, that draws international headlines. And as you said, in this case, the fact that they talk about how wonderful it is that another Friday passed peacefully. Yeah, maybe a Friday on the Temple Mount at a specific time and on a specific day passed peacefully, but certainly we are experiencing an upswing of terror. And this is in Israel proper, by the way. Beer Sheba, Gan Yavneh, and cities throughout the country.
There is mass incitement to violence that comes from the Temple Mount during the sermons that are
hanging Hamas flags.
It's not that these are sermons of peace that are being offered there, and it just so happens that the people that go up there to worship, they don't believe what the imams are telling them, and they decide to become violent on their own. They are being incited to violence by their political leaders, by their religious leaders, and that is totally different than whatever happens in Israel, where people are taught that even if there's a threat, that you don't respond violently. That is the nature of what's being taught in Israel versus what's being incited in the Palestinian society.
Yeah, this has been a problem all the way since the Oslo Accords back in the 90s, and we're still seeing the results of that today. We've talked about Gaza, we've talked about Judea and Samaria. Looking to the north, an Israeli soldier lightly wounded on Tuesday by a rocket launched by Hezbollah from southern Lebanon, and it seems that almost every hour at this point, I'm getting alerts on my phone that more and more rockets are being launched at civilians and soldiers, whomever they fire at, by Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's almost hourly. I'm getting the code red alerts on my phone.
Yeah, what we're starting to see also is that Hezbollah is using rockets that have much heavier warheads than they were in the past. So they're using heavier equipment that can do a lot more damage to infrastructure. Now, it's not killing too many people because Israel had already evacuated tens of thousands of residents from these areas. But at the rate that we're starting to see them using heavier weaponry, I think it's not too long before we would start to see Hezbollah potentially using some longer range rockets. And really, there's some degree of luck that's involved here, because if these attacks happen to be more deadly, and each one of these attacks could be extremely deadly, that is the type of incident that could then spark this wider conflict that most Lebanese and Israelis and the whole international community are worried about.
If that wasn't enough, Alex, we turn all the way to the south, the tip of Israel, the border there with Egypt, Eilat, the resort town of Eilat, Israeli city, very popular
on the Red Sea.
With the tourists on the Red Sea. They had an attack directed against it. It's not the first time. A building was lightly damaged in a drone attack overnight on Sunday, according to the IDF. UAV was launched from Iraq and entered Israeli territory from Jordan. a group called the Islamic Resistance, an umbrella group of Iranian-backed radical Shiite Muslims in Iraq. And they are also, again, not for the first time, but they are also trying to be heard as well, show that they can stand up to Israel and launch these rockets at the southern town of Eilat.
You really understand that Iran has created a complete ring of fire around the state of Israel, and it's not just Hamas. This isn't a war between Israelis and Palestinians. Okay, this is a war between Israel and Hamas, between Israel and Hezbollah, between Israel and the Houthis, between Israel and the various terror organizations that have destabilized Iraq and Syria. And the one fabric that connects all these terror organizations is Iran. This is a war between Israel and Iran's terror proxies that are for the first time operating as a true terror axis against the state of Israel. And Israel really has to be aware and is aware that it is fighting a multi-front war. And since this war started, Israel has been retaliating, not just in Gaza, also in Lebanon, also in Syria, as we saw this week, strikes north of Aleppo and Damascus, and also now we'll see if Israel will retaliate inside of Iraq.
This might be a weekly segment on the show. I think we're going to call it, Alex, Did You Know? I know we did it last week. Did you know, Alex? And this to me is just unbelievable. The sister of the head of Hamas, she lives, guess where? Here in Israel. The sister of the head of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh. She is married to an Israeli Bedouin, from what I understand. And she's been living for many years here in the state of Israel, somewhere in the south. But Israeli security forces yesterday arrested the sister of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh on suspicion of associating with and supporting Arab terrorists. No surprise to me.
Well, why would a sister of Ismail Haniyeh be associated with or supporting Palestinian terrorists? I think the bigger surprise is, why is she living in a Bedouin town? Because you don't see too much intermarriage between Palestinians and Bedouin. Even among Palestinians, it's very tribal, and one tribe doesn't really, one clan will not marry members of another clan.
She must be a really special lady, this one.
I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, but I didn't know.
She was,
got me on this one.
Well, she's behind bars, at least for now. I don't know how long those charges are going to hold, but they raided her house, did Israel security forces, confiscated documents, other materials, indicating her involvement in serious security offenses. So at least for now, the sister of the head of Hamas is in an Israeli prison, and that's the reality. That's what's going on right now, Alex. On that note, that's really going to do it for today. If you can believe that last story or not, check it out for yourselves. Go to jns.org. That's where I found that headline, jns.org. For all your news from Israel and the Middle East. Of course, go to JNS TV on YouTube to see all of this amazing content, videos produced here in Jerusalem, telling the reality of the story here in this part of the world. Big shout out to Ryan Lifshitz for all he does behind the scenes here, making this program a reality. Alex, have a great week, and let's continue to pray for our soldiers, pray for success in this military battle against pure evil, which is Hamas in the south. Let's hope for quiet on the home front as well. And have a great week. Be safe, everybody out there.